Alrighty, welcome back, my friends. Welcome to video 2 of this week's section of videos. So we finished talking about sunlight and the availability of it in order to photosynthesize, and the requirements. That's like basically one of the main requirements needed for productivity in the oceans. And now we're gonna finish up talking about the other requirements that we need for productivity. So this is something that you can kind of relate to in your own space, in that we need this stuff in order to live, thrive, and survive as well, right? So we are like houseplants. We do need sunlight, but we also we gotta eat, right? We gotta eat. We need nutrients. So just like us, phytoplankton need nutrients as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the nutrients that can come and where they come from. And really, we've talked about these ideas before. This isn't really anything necessarily new, so this is going to be a nice review. So two main sources of the nutrients to the oceans. One are from the continents, and two is from the ocean. So from the continents, we get runoff from rivers, dust blown off from deserts, as well as erosional dust, right? So like Pacifica kind of just falling off into the ocean. That is a really nice example of just erosion just happening, right? Or, it's been super windy this whole year, so dust can kind of be blown off from that. And then we've seen a couple of examples of the dust blown off deserts. So there's the big desert in Africa called the Sahara Desert, and it's a very duny desert. If you recall from the chlorophyll map that we looked at together last time, we saw that the Sahara Desert is completely barren of chlorophyll, as well as like the Middle East and parts of the Tibetan Plateau, etc. So it's not like the deserts here in North America. These are actually lush deserts down here. If that, I know, kind of sounds like a little bit of an oxymoron, but there is plant life here still, right? We got cactus of all varying different kinds that are actually very beautiful. If you ever have the chance to go down to Arizona, like Phoenix and Tucson, really, really beautiful lush deserts. But the Sahara Desert is completely different. It's very, very dusty. So when there's massive wind events off of the Sahara, it blows these huge clouds of dust, and they settle onto the ocean surface, and plankton are super grateful for that, and they utilize that as food. And then we also talked about upwelling from the deep ocean. We talked about this when we talked about El Nino. If you recall, we had the upwelling situation going on there because of our the Ekman transport, because of the from north to south winds, which overall transports the water out into the open ocean, and water has to replace that, right? So we have cold, nutrient-rich water coming up towards the surface. So here's another example of some rivers. I know in the previous video I looked at the Mississippi River as well as the SF Bay. And this is an example here of various rivers from the Pacific Northwest going kind of out into the ocean here. I know it's more so like specified on the land part of the Pacific Northwest, as opposed to more so like the river parts. But I just wanted to show that there are rivers that flow all through the Cascade Mountains. We have the Olympic Mountains here. Seattle would be basically right here. And this is the Puget Sound, which is another glorious estuary up there. But we can see that there are so many different sources of rocks and minerals, because we have the high deserts of eastern Washington and eastern Oregon. We also have the massive Cascade Mountains, and then you have the green, lush areas of western Washington and Oregon. So there's lots of different sources of nutrients that can be kind of picked up along the way. as the rivers eventually flow into the ocean. So I just think that's a really cool image of that. And then one last thing, which I guess I should have had a picture of the Mississippi River again, but we have to really consider what else we put onto the skin, onto the rock, or onto the land part of our planet, and how that can eventually make its way into the oceans. What I'm alluding to here is the agriculture business in the Midwest, which is where the Mississippi River flows all the way up the Midwest, it flows down the Midwest, but it snakes all the way up into Minnesota. And farming is a huge piece of the economy in that area, but it's not farming for us. It's farming for to feed the cattle and pigs, which is wild, because if you've ever been to the Midwest or flown over the Midwest, the massive fields there are that's all for not human consumption, at least in the immediate. So that's kind of crazy. But in order to make sure that those fields live, thrive, and survive, we have to put stuff on them, right? So we put pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, fertilizer, and all that stuff. And it seeps into the land and into the groundwater, which eventually makes its way out to the ocean. So there can be some really not great things that can come out of that in the long term. Last little bit of nutrients can come from upwelling in both coastal and the open ocean. So this is just a reminder of what upwelling is, coastal upwelling, right? So we would have Ekman transport going off of the coast, and water has to replace it from somewhere. So deep, nutrient-rich water comes from the depths. And that brings nutrients into the area, and then plankton really love that. They are super, super into it. And so the image here on the right is just showing chlorophyll concentrations in the surface waters. So I want you to try to stare at this for a little bit and see, like with the red color being the more chlorophyll and the blue color being less chlorophyll. And you can see some pretty big hot spots, right? We have the SF Bay. We also have Monterey down here, right? Lots of action going on there. Some of the other rivers, I think like the Russian River and the American River that flow into the oceans here, but also up in the Oregon-Washington border, we have the Columbia River, which is the river that we were just looking at, or the section we were just looking at in the previous slide. But our location in the world is not the only location where upwelling exists. We have several different spots here. So this is just looking at areas of upwelling from winds. So we have the coast of South America. We have the west coast of Africa. We have the west coast of Australia. And we learned about the process of upwelling a while ago, but this is really just trying to show these regions. So kind of cool, I think. Really, really, really quite neat. And it shows that the nutrients is quite enough for activity to occur around those areas because of the nutrients. So again, this was really focusing on the surface waters, but it's also very important to recognize that nutrients goes to the deep ocean as well. As we know, how do the deep oceans even get so much nutrients that we're then able to upwell into the coastal areas? So nutrients in the deep ocean comes from biogeochemical cycling. Whew, it's a mouthful, I know. Bio, life, geology, chemical things breaking down and cycling out. So in this image here, we can see that we have producers and consumers, which mean algae and plants are producers, consumers are us animals. And then in the warm waters, we can then produce food and oxygen in terms of producers, and then animals produce CO2. And everybody poops, everybody poops, or when things die and break down, they kind of float down, and we call that detritus. It's basically the fancy science word for poop, but there's more to detritus than just the dookie. But all of this detritus eventually gets decomposed by bacteria and maybe even other animals. And then the arrows here are trying to show that they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller, meaning that things are getting broken down more and more and more as as these kind of particles sift down into the ocean and eventually onto the sea floor. And there's other things like dissolved nutrients like nitrates and phosphates, and this occurs thanks to decomposition. And then, of course, there's still decomposition on the bottom of the ocean as well. And so that can all be kind of, again, just kind of dissolved into the water in and of itself. And whale falls are a massive source of nutrients to the deep oceans. Whale falls whales just in general are absolutely fantastic creatures. They do a lot of work for us in the surface waters by eating up all of this krill and plankton that's producing oxygen for us and taking in CO2. So basically the whales eating CO2, if you want to think of it that way. And then they poop a lot, and then they also die. And if they die in the water, then they eventually explode, but then they are just huge, big meals for any creature along the way. I think I've shown a couple videos of some sharky boys kind of going after it, after a whale that had died at the surface. And then there's a video linked here, which I'll also link into the homework links. It's only 3 minutes, but it shows a whale fall in the Monterey Bay. And the rate of composition between when they first found it in 2019 to 2020 when they posted that video. It's really, really fascinating to see how much it has deteriorated over time. So with that, when we return, we will finish up this section talking about primary productivity and which oceans are the most productive. And the answer might surprise you. All right, thanks so much for watching. Appreciate you.